Welcome to my early review of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I'm calling this a review because I can already see the majority of the things that matter to me within a game. This is of course done with the preview demo, where I basically have unfettered access to what seems to be the first chapter of the game. And as you can see, we're currently walking around in a world map, and this is a part of how we explore, but I wanted to be here because we see the least stuff and should spoil the least that I can for people. I'm not going to go over anything story related in this video. That's not usually something that I concentrate on in a game. Usually it's just whether or not I enjoy the gameplay of a game and whether or not it keeps me hooked enough for me to continue playing. I have to say, this game, before we get into like the specific parts, is just phenomenal at almost anything. It's actually difficult to find something that the game could improve on. I have to find something, so there will be a couple of negatives somewhere. This video is going to be me mostly gushing over how awesome the preview is. I hope the demo does become available for everybody to try at some point. It is 100% awesome, and I think a lot of people will probably commit to buying if they get to try it. But in any case, we're going to start out with the combat, because that is the thing that I enjoy the most, and I think is the most important part of gameplay. So we're going to go through an encounter here just so you guys can see how it works. We'll go through the turn order and this kind of stuff. Probably going to go to 2 combats because I want to concentrate on our abilities and show that you can get through the game or encounters without using some of the skill-based mechanics for those that might be worried about it. In fact, the settings of the game even say to you in expedition mode, you kind of can go in here without mastering the dodges and the parries. You'll probably still have to do some if you're on normal. If you go into easy, probably not. I've been playing just on normal. I haven't played on hard to see just how hard that is. So we'll go through one and we'll show some abilities going off, how some of them interact with each other, and then we'll go through some of the defensive counterplay because I think it's amazing, and then we're going to go into how we can build out the party, because it's important to note this game treats the party almost as a character. Each of the party members will fill like specific roles, such as Lune here I use as mostly by healer, but a lot of the abilities, they have things that set the other characters up, and depending on how you choose to do that, because there are a lot of things that we can pick from that can drastically change how the gameplay goes. But in any case, let's get into a combat here. Interact with these guys. That's going to make sure that we have a surprise attack so we can look at some abilities as we go in. There are going to be mentions of a lot of games here because they seem to have basically taken the best bits of a lot of games I really enjoy. Firstly, up at the top left, we can see the turn order. If you've ever played Final Fantasy X, it's effectively the same, including the fact that if you have enough speed over your opponent, you can get double turns. I'm currently concentrating on Lune, who is my healer, to have mostly speed, and so every now and then she'll get an extra turn over the other players, and in fact she actually has ice that can slow enemies down as well. Very, very cool and a good thing to know about. We'll get more onto that a little bit later in the video. First, you can see I've got a lot that I can do here with my character. We've got aim. We are able to shoot, which is mostly good for dealing with weak points on enemies. We'll look at that in a second. We have items. This is where we get to mention souls. So people are going to call this game the Dark Souls of turn-based games, and there are some inspirations. I'm not going there. I don't think the difficulty is like so hard that we need to say that. But you can see all of these items here have a set amount of usage, and those reset when you rest at a checkpoint. Kind of soulsy, if you want to call it that, but we're not really relying on them all that much. Then of course we have skills. As you level up, you can get more of these, and we can actually adjust how some of these might play with some extra items, which you guys will see later on. And you can see they're kind of broken down into separate lines depending on what they do. In the case of this guy, whose name I can't remember, we've got lots of stuff going on. We can see that the top move, which is the one that I use to start most battles, is basically a power-up for the party. Now you can see that it affects 1 to 3 allies. Now how many allies it's going to affect is going to depend on our ability to press the QTE. Okay, so we're going to activate this, and I need to press X twice. Bit of timing, right? Because we need to interact with the game to get off the things that we need to get off. So you can see now on all of my characters, I now have that sword icon. They are now all doing more damage. We can do lots of other stuff like this, and all of the abilities work in a similar way. Now in addition to that, they all have their own mechanics. So if you look at my dude's icon specifically, you can see we've got 2 of 10 on that little lightning mode, and he is basically building up to a huge mega attack. So I quite like to use him as a support character, and then eventually when that charges up, it goes bang and usually finishes most fights. It really is that damaging, including bosses. The main boss of the demo, he did in like 2 shots with that. Moving on to our mage here, I like to use her as a healer, so we've got all of our healing abilities over on the side, and you can see that when it comes to activating these abilities, they all have those blue numbers, and here's one we actually can't use right now because we don't have enough ability points. So if I wanted to play safe here and just wanted to make sure I had enough ability points so that maybe we can resurrect someone if they go down, I could choose to attack instead. That's going to build up more ability points. There are other ways to generate them as well, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But with Lune here, that's her name, she has her own mechanic, and you can see we have those 4 shards or 4 spaces on that little sigil onto the side there. And basically the way this works is when I use a spell, you can see we have that plus sign on the ice lance, for example. When I go ahead and I use it on this guy, you'll see that now on her icon, we filled 2 of those spaces. Her abilities are able to consume that to have additional effects. The final girl here, whose name escapes me again. I'm so sorry, I'm terrible with names. She is able to change her stance based on the skills that we use. So you can see here we have the offensive switch. When I use that move, she goes into offense mode. She'll actually do more damage but take more damage at the same time. I'm not going to try to make too many recommendations, but we actually have a guard up ability, which puts us into offensive stance, but also puts shell on, which basically counteracts it. Absolutely stellar opening move for her. Now I'm just gonna I didn't mean to do that. I'm so sorry. That was habit. I'm supposed to just stand here and take damage so you guys can see that we just go through the combat and we'll be fine. That was so sick though, wasn't it? We'll talk about parrying in a minute. When it comes to the ranged attack then, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to deal with this weak point right here. You can see this is actually going to take one of my ability points away, but it does pretty good damage when you target one of the weak points on the enemy. Here's where, hopefully, if something survives, I can show you guys a bit of interplay, right? So we have on the dude here, he has marking shot, okay, which is going to leave a mark on the enemy that we hit. That mark is going to make it so that the next person that attacks that enemy is going to do... I'm going to take the damage because I'm not supposed to be parrying. It's going to do 57 more damage. Now, not only do we have that, we've got our lady here in offensive mode, and she happens to have a move called Pierce, which does increase damage when an enemy is marked. So this is where the interplay is coming into it, because this is how the styles of all of the players are all going to be mixing in together, right? So we go Pierce. We're also going to put that on you. Have a good old time with that. So that finishes out a combat. Obviously, we didn't go over the defensive mechanics. In short, kind of, I guess we touched on it there. We're able to parry an attack. You get an automatic counterattack, even if it's a ranged attack like you saw just there. So you take the enemy straight out, pretty much. Unless it's a chained attack. If their attack is like a chain attack, does 2 hits, you need to parry both hits to get the counterattack off. We also have dodge. The idea of dodge is if you're not confident with the parrying, you can choose to dodge instead. And even if you don't want to be good at dodging and parrying, you might as well try for the dodge because there's no downside to failing it. And then we have the jump. So some bosses will do like a big explosion and you can jump over it. And usually when you get the jump, you're prompted to press another button, get a free attack off. There are also huge attacks that affect the whole party. And if you can parry all of those, your party will actually do their own awesome looking joint attack on the enemy, which is just kind of cool. Let's move into the build crafting side of this, because I think this is honestly what's going to set a lot of people's heads on fire, and in a good way. And you can already see Soul's inspiration that we were talking about earlier, right? So we have these chroma elixirs. If I use a chroma elixir, that heals everybody back to full. It's exactly like having an Estus flask. So it heals everybody back to full, and we get 2 of those per rest right now. When I rest, I get those reset, and that resets all of the enemies in the zone. When it comes to build crafting then, we have several things to look at, but first let's go over attributes. Pretty obvious what a lot of this does. Some of it's health, some of it's damage, some of it's agility. So agility is for speed. So when I'm coming over to Luna here, you can see that we've got like massive speed on there. She gets a lot of double turns. I really like that. We have crit, we have defense, everything else. And you can kind of peg these out however it is that you want to have them out. So you can see for me right now, just kind of whilst I'm practicing with the demo right now, I've gone for a fairly defensive Mayel, which is probably a mistake because I think she's probably your main damage dealer during a fight. Gustav does the big explosive damage. You can make him do damage, but we're going to look at some skills in a minute. And when it comes to like fulfilling roles in the party, there isn't like a true tank role, but Luna seems to play the best healer role. Gustav here, just remembered his name, is kind of a generalist. So he has some self heals, he has good marks, he's got good moves for setting up other party members. So he's pretty good for that. Mayel is just very good for skill rotations, and that's how I feel like she kind of operates best. Is we're obviously we need to cycle between those stances that we saw to get the most out of her. So that's kind of what she wants to be doing, which is why I think generalist is pretty good for her. It's probably overkill to have the defense on there. It might be better to go with something like crit or some might on there for some damage, but I do like her just being nice and tanky with a bit of speed. It's cool that some of these also level up more stats than they do. So for example, when you put luck up, you'll actually get a little bit of defense. When you put speed up, you actually get a little bit of crit. There is like a little bit of crossplay between the stats. Now you might see the scaling on there, so that's a little bit of a spoiler for what we're going to be getting onto later on in the video. But yes, weapons have scalings with different types of stats, which means depending on the weapon that you want to use, you may scale different stats depending on that. Before we get to equipment, I want to get into skills. This is where I'm kind of leaning towards different styles for the characters. Now, it's worth noting that Gustav, we can't actually see any of his skills right now. I don't know whether or not this is spoiler related, but we can see most of the tree for the other 2 characters. But Gustav here, we can't actually see that much. What we can see is that he can do fairly reliable damage. He has a party buff for damage. He has self heals and can remove status from himself. Basically, his main business seems to be setting up marks for the party, setting up damage for the party, and in general, trying to make it so that he doesn't require any attention from the healer because he's able to heal himself in between turns. And then as he builds up his main charge, he can deal huge instant damage. Lune here has instant access to healing. As soon as she starts out, she's able to progress into the healing tree that you can see in the middle here, which is why I've angled her that way. And it actually ends up becoming, because I've done that with her, she's actually the best person to use items with. So we're going to look at some other stuff in a minute. Overall, that's where she's kind of starting out for me. Now, her mechanic is really, really interesting because she builds up those charges, and then when she consumes those charges, she gets cool abilities. So for example, you can see those green splodges there. So when she consumes 2 green splodges, which are called stains, it suddenly costs no activation points, which means if we use something like Earth Rising a couple of times, we can actually build up some of that, and then we have a free heal on her. So it's very much worth checking out the charges that you're building up as you're going through, and you do need to balance having something that can consume the charges, because if she fills up all 4 of the slots that she gets, you can be stuck not being able to consume those charges and put the charges in that you want. You do need to have a bit of planning with her to make sure that you are using the correct moves and consuming the charges at the right time so that she has everything that she needs. Mael here is just awesome. I can't get enough of her. Weirdly enough, she has the guard up, which gives the whole party extra defense. Absolutely sick, and sets her into her damaging stance because she has three stances. She has the defense stance, the damage stance, and then the extra damage stance, the virtuoso stance, but I haven't used much of that one. But the idea is the more aggressive her stance is, the more damage she takes. So having guard up that also puts us into a damaging stance is just really strong. I think everybody's loadout with Mael is probably going to start with that, because I just don't see why you wouldn't use that as your first setup skill. Now, the other thing to notice is that there's a lot of counterplay when it comes to elements. For example, Mael is able to reduce an opponent's resistance to fire, so we can actually then start using fire across the rest of the party, which is why I say we turn this into a bit of a build, because Mael can use something like Swift Stride to regain AP when a target is burning, and yes, she could set a target on fire herself, but we do have fire attacks with Lune, and there are also ways of putting fire attacks onto Gustav. So that's a loose look at the skills and the kind of craziness that we can get into when it comes to loadouts. Now, the cool thing is that the itemization in this game is also very good. I'm going to touch on exploration a little bit later on, because we're going to kind of go into world design. Items that we discover out in the world actually feel quite meaningful, because weapons level up. So as we use the weapons, you can see the characters can unlock additional abilities with the weapons. So that's quite cool, because hopefully that will mean that there's not just outright we're just changing weapon every time we find a new weapon. Instead, we have scaling, we have elements, and they level up as we use them. So if we wanted to go fire Lune and wanted to have her be in an aggressive stance, we could go ahead, take something like that. It's going to give her the fire element, and then when she uses fire skills, that suddenly costs less AP, and all this other stuff. So we've got lots of ability to build out a party that works in the way that we want to use it. That brings us to Pictos, though, which also start to bring your build full circle. So as you can see here, we actually have several things that do all sorts of stuff, and Lune is probably the most interesting for me right now, because we have it so that on the bottom there, cleansing tint, healing tints, which are the potions, will also remove status effects. Now I have it so that Lune is not only able to heal the spells, but if she uses the tints, so the healing potions, she's also more effective with them than the other characters. Now, of course, you could choose to do that on Gustav instead, if you wanted Gustav to be a bit more of a jack of all trades. I'm not saying you have to do it with just Lune, but it's cool that we're able to build out the characters in this way so that they work in the way that we want to use them. Additionally, you can see on her, I also have the SOS shell, because I'm having her as the healer. It also means if she gets targeted down, she's going to be tough to take down because she has auto shell on. And then I have it so that her basic attack actually increases the break on enemies. So enemies can be stunned over time. So because often she'll be building up AP with normal attacks, we can obviously double down on that. Now, looking at some different counterplay, as we were saying before, we can get AP back with Mael because of her ability. And so therefore, now what we have is when Gustav makes a free aim shot, so when we target one of the weak points on an enemy, we can set it on fire with that, which then means suddenly Mael can use her Swift Strike ability to gain AP rather than use it when she's attacking, which is really, really strong. Additionally, if we do that same thing, a base attack, if he has to just normal attack, we'll apply defenseless, so we can reduce an enemy's defenses, and we can make it so that a mark can also be applied during an aimed shot. We basically made it so that his standard attacks are going to be fairly effective. They're going to give us lots of benefits as we are using him, and we're just basically piling all of the benefits onto Mael as she does most of the general damage in a combat. And that is just one way, and my way, of using the characters for now. We've barely even gotten into the game, and we already seem to have a ridiculous amount of options for how we can load out and choose to use the party. We'll touch on exploration, but I really don't want to talk about too much, other than we have a world map, which we can look around. This is the very beginning, so really not spoiling too much for anyone. We have sprint, obviously. There's no jump in the world map, but there are hidden things that we can go out and find. And one of the cool things is we can generate shortcuts as well. So there's a bridge just over there, which actually had to interact with like a little button, and that made a shortcut to and from the point of interest you can see over there, all those floating balls and stuff. That is actually a location we can go to. And then we also have points of interest. So you can see here we have this little portal here. Now everything might look a little bit weird to you, and that's because there's some kind of, and I don't know exactly what's supposed to be happening. We're kind of like underwater. I don't know exactly what is going on, like why everything's all floating like this, but there's some kind of like underwater coral theme going on with the game. And then we have the hub areas where we have like standardized jumping, and you can see here that when it comes to like grappling points, they're very easy to spot, so not too much is going to be hidden from you. There are secrets and hidden NPCs, side quests and things like this to find, all of which are quite interesting. And there's kind of like a Nier slash Stellar Blade feeling to the game when you're going around exploring. The atmosphere of the game is great. In general, everything just looks really nice as we are exploring around the game world. I really have to be quite hard when I have to try and give any kind of drawbacks to the game. The only realistic ones are that it's a turn-based combat system, so if you don't like turn-based games, then this game isn't going to be for you. Don't even know how you could detract points for that, but it's just something that I can think of. Sometimes the lip sync isn't perfect. It's a very minor thing for me to say, but I have to say something. And the game's combat does have a very steep learning curve at the beginning. It takes quite a while to get used to some of the enemy attacks where you need to parry or dodge them. There's a lot going off with the character builds. That's a plus to me, but I'm sure some people would prefer if it was a little bit simpler. So I feel like those are things that could put some people off of playing the game. But other than that, I think the game is absolutely awesome. I think it is a safe bet with everything that I've played so far, and I hope that some of you guys will join me on launch.